If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description. Hello out there. Welcome to MINDSHOCK. This is part 2 of Mothman. The enigmatic creature that terrorized Point Pleasant, West Virginia from November 1966 to December 1967, culminating in the collapse of the Silver Bridge on December 15th, 1967, giving rise to the legend that the Mothman somehow was either giving warnings of a catastrophe, possibly caused it, or was just an alien or interdimensional entity hanging around in an area that was about to have a catastrophe. In the previous episode, we discussed several potential Mothman sightings and encounters throughout history before West Virginia. This is part 2 of the Mothman series. I am your host, Bruce McGuire, and we'll go over the West Virginia accounts. Now, the Silver Bridge links West Virginia to Ohio. It connects Point Pleasant, West Virginia to Gallipolis, Ohio. It was completed in 1928. It spans 700 feet and is 2,235 feet in length, and it stood for 39 years. In the interest of preserving the chronological integrity of the history of sightings and encounters, before I get to the famed Scarberry-Mallette accounts on November 15th, 1966, I will briefly go over sightings that occurred before November 15th, 1966, in the West Virginia, Ohio area, of which there are a few. In John Keel's first book mentioning the Mothman, Strange Creatures from Time and Space, in 1970, he took an account that occurred sometime between 1960 and 1961. A woman in West Virginia who requested to be anonymous due to her position in civil affairs no longer remembered the exact time this happened. So it was somewhere 1960, 1961. She was driving on a Route 2 along the Ohio River on the West Virginia side with her father. And she was already in late middle age, it looks like. They passed the edge of a park known as the Chief Cornstalk Hunting Grounds when she said a tall humanoid figure appeared in the road in front of them. She said about the incident, "I slowed, and as we go closer we could see that it was much larger than a man, a big gray figure. It stood in the middle of the road. Then a pair of wings unfolded from its back, and they practically filled the whole road. It almost looked like a small airplane. Then it took off straight up, disappearing out of sight in seconds. We were both terrified. I stepped on the gas and raced out of there. We talked it over and decided not to tell anybody about it. Who would believe us anyway?" So apparently she told John Keel this account several years after it occurred, so probably at some point 1970, so this would have been almost 10 years after it happened, several years before the Silver Bridge occurrence. Now, what's strange about this account is if she requested to be anonymous, you can't say she's making this sighting for fame and fortune and to be interviewed on TV. And apparently this is the only time she gave her account to John Keel. So that is very interesting. So she's not after fame and fortune. Supposedly she has a good paying job in government, you know? So it is a little bit strange why she would make it up. And then, of course, what we hadn't discussed in episode 1, suppose the so-called rational explanations was that the Mothman is simply a sandhill crane, a very large bird. Clearly, these people are not so delusional and insane that they're mistaking a bird for a humanoid man with gigantic wings. And especially people that are used to seeing large birds, or the sandhill crane if it's that prominent in the area. Now, the sandhill crane is a pretty big bird, and its wingspan can get anywhere. It's usually only average a little over 5 feet, but the largest ones can get up to 7 feet in wingspan, which again, that wouldn't really be enough to cover a gigantic 2-lane road, but it only stands at about 39 inches tall. So that's a little over 3 feet. So possibly from a distance in the sky, the people that were strict with the panic of the Mothman sightings, it's possible a couple of those might have been a sandhill crane flying in the air or another bird. But to explain away these close encounters with a 6 to 7 foot humanoid man with glowing red eyes, yeah, that's a little bit of a stretch. Another vague sighting, reported by John Keel in the same book, Strange Creatures from Time and Space, in 1970, a woman living on the Ohio River, so this is several miles from Clendenin, West Virginia, said that at some point in 1965, her 7-year-old son ran into the house excited and told her he had seen an angel, a man with wings. So she just thought it was his overactive imagination and never thought about it again until the following year when the Mothman sightings started being reported in Point Pleasant. Clendenin is about 70 to 80 miles from Point Pleasant, so not exceptionally close. John Keel also took an account from a woman in the Ohio Valley, did not specify the exact location. In the summer of 1966, so several months before the big sightings, which occurred in November, a woman in the Ohio Valley, she was the wife of a doctor and was in her backyard when she spotted a giant butterfly. She said it was 6 feet long and it soared past her very rapidly. She only told a few people about it until John Keel. Again, no name. Are these people looking for fame and fortune, notoriety, and they want to remain anonymous? I don't know. So let's get into Point Pleasant, West Virginia, November 1966. There were actually 2 accounts in the area prior to the Scarberry-Mallette accounts. There were actually 2 sightings in the area prior to the Scarberry-Mallette accounts. On November 1st, 1966, at the Armory by Camp Conley Road in Point Pleasant, a National Guardsman said he saw a large brown humanoid figure perched on the limb of a tree. Apparently, he only reported this after the Mothman story exploded. Again, were these people just simply too scared to come forward, or they didn't think anything of it, or they thought their mind was playing tricks on them, and then when the Mothman legend and the Mothman news accounts, reports, sightings all came flooding in from 50 to 100 people, they decided that maybe it wasn't their mind playing tricks on them. So, here is a more known sighting. It's the Kenneth Duncan sighting, November 12th, 1966. Kenneth Duncan's father-in-law, Homer Smith, had died and they were digging a grave for him in a cemetery near Clendenin, West Virginia. He was being helped by 4 men, Robert Lovejoy, William Poole, Andrew Godby, and Emil Gibson. So Kenneth Duncan said he saw a humanoid figure that flew out from trees and glided really low over their heads. He said it was gliding through the trees and was in sight for about a minute. It didn't look like any kind of bird, but it seemed to be a man with wings. So supposedly these men discussed the sighting with a few friends and that's it, until the Scarberry-Mallette sighting 3 days later. Now, I can't help but find this encounter suspect, because Duncan claimed to have seen it for about a minute. And so he didn't care to alert his comrades. None of them saw it. Very suspect, unless they were quite far away from him when this was occurring. If he misjudged time and it was closer to about 30 seconds, and the other men were not right next to him, then maybe. But it's still suspect. And the fact that he didn't report it until after the official Mothman sighting isn't as suspect, as similar to UFO and Bigfoot and other phenomenon. People don't want to seem crazy, so it's easier to come forward when others have reported a similar experience, especially when there's a lot of others. But I still can't quite, were these other men interviewed? Who was actually doing the digging? If they were digging, if all of them were in the grave digging, if one was on top, one was getting supplies, like where exactly were they situated? And if it was even 30 seconds, it's not 2 seconds, after about 5 to 10 to 15 seconds, he could have said, hey, look, there's a flying human with wings. That's amazing. That's insane. Look at that. Look up at the sky. Especially if it really was closer to a minute, like what's his excuse for not having them look? So it's little bit suspect, this sighting. So now for the main sighting, the sighting and encounters that caused rise to the Mothman phenomena. So, this was November 15th, 1966, Point Pleasant, Virginia. So this was the first story about the Mothman in the news. So we have two couples joyriding. Linda Scarberry and Roger Scarberry. Linda was 19 years old, Roger was 18 years old, and these teens attended Point Pleasant High School. They were married. So they were joyriding in a black 1957 Chevy, and they were hanging out with their friends Steve and Mary Mallette at the TNT area, which also included the North Power Plant. So this area, it's called the TNT area by locals, and it's currently a wildlife preserve. It's about 7 miles north of Point Pleasant. It was used to manufacture and store munitions during World War II. There were nearly 100 large bunkers that housed explosives. The power plant operated from 1942 to 1945, cost $45 million, and employed 3,500 people during its main operation. A bunch of sightings occurred around this TNT area, unofficially dubbed Mothman's home. So, later on it became known that the TNT area was really polluted, and a lot of the byproducts of creating the ammunition, there was also red water seeping into ponds nearby, and that contained levels of TNT explosives. In the 70s, it was declared an environmental disaster area. The North Power Plant building was destroyed in the 1990s. On May 17, 2010, there was actually an explosion when an underground storage bunker went up in flames. So there's a lot in the Mothman lore that points to the TNT area being why Mothman was attracted to it. If it was an alien interdimensional being upset with human polluting and other stuff, or just saw the danger that it might explode, whatever, whatnot. Other theories say that this creature was some kind of mutated cryptid due to the pollution, some kind of mutant freak. Anyway, so this was a popular hangout spot for teenagers. It was also a popular drag racing area, and this will factor into the story shortly. So the first aspect of the report is that Steve Mallette noticed large red eyes being reflected from the car's headlights. So then he pointed it out to everyone else, and they noticed it, and they saw that it was glowing red eyes belonging to a creature. And they saw this creature, a large gray humanoid like a man with wings, going around the corner of the power plant. It didn't run, but it was wobbling like it was off balance. Linda Scarberry, who would be the most interviewed witness, described fiery red eyes and a body like a man but with wings, 6 to 7 feet tall. The wings were folded against its back. She said you could see muscles in its legs. So all of them were scared now, so they quickly drove off down Route 62. Linda told Roger to go faster. As they were going around a curve, they saw the creature again on a hill. It spread its wings and went straight into the air. So everyone was telling Roger to go faster. Now I'm going to preempt a few of the skeptics' claims about Roger Scarberry's 1957 Chevy and his driving ability. Apparently, he really was proud of the car, he worked on the car a lot, and he was a very skilled driver through drag racing. So he was very capable of performing vehicle maneuvers that most would not. So at this point, he's going faster, and the Mothman is going back and forth attacking the car. Supposedly there were even scratches found on the car later. Linda said, "We didn't know what it was. I don't think we've ever been so scared." During a straight line in the road, they were supposedly going over 100 miles an hour, but the creature was still following with them. And its shadow went across the car as it flew. And they could also hear the wings hitting the top of the car. Mary Mallette said it squeaked like a big mouse. So when they reached Point Pleasant, the city limits, the creature disappeared, going into a field, and they went into town. So they stopped at Dairyland, a local shop, and were trying to decide whether to report this sighting. Linda said that they should go to the police, but Steve and Roger were afraid the police would laugh at them. So they wanted to go verify that the Mothman was still around. Now, obviously, they were too scared to do that, so then they just turned around. So as they were turning around, they saw a large dog carcass lying in the road. So this is going to factor into another sighting, another account, which is a little bizarre in its own right. But the dog was there. The dog's body was there at one point, then it wasn't when they drove again. Now, the Mothman jumped out in the area where the dead dog previously was, going over the top of the car and into a field on the other side of the road. So now they're really, really scared, and they go to Tiny's Diner, where they contact the police. They described it as a flying man with 10-foot wings following their car. Deputy Millard Halstead took this report. Obviously, Halstead did not believe them, but he was familiar with the teens and knew that they weren't ones to make up a story. And he saw that they were really scared, so he went to investigate. They all drove back out to the TNT area. Millard shined a light around the area and the tree lines. He heard static disturbances on the radio, but he could not find the creature. So the couple said they saw shadows circling nearby and dust coming up from a coal yard, but they didn't see the creature itself. The Mallettes were too scared to go home, so they actually stayed with the Scarberrys at their trailer, and they had the lights on all night, and none of them slept. So the next day, the sheriff, George Johnson, actually held a press conference because of this encounter. And this was when the creature was dubbed the Mothman. They called it the Mothman because it was similar to Batman, and that was the famous Batman TV show at the time. Steve Mallette said, "We understand people are laughing at us, but we wouldn't make up all this to make us look like fools." So now, during the daytime, the Mallettes and Scarberries go back to the TNT area and they found tracks, 2 horseshoes put together, but smooth. Steve apparently saw something fly into a boiler, but none of them decided to stick around. So that's the main part of the Scarberry-Mallette sighting. And this sighting prompted a lot more reports, and actually there was large groups of people going to the TNT area to try to spot the creature for themselves. On Wednesday, November 16th, 1966, first news article was couples see man-sized bird, ... creature, ... something. It was a bird or something. It definitely wasn't a flying saucer. 2 Point Pleasant couples said today they encountered a man-sized bird-like creature in the TNT area about midnight last night. Sheriff's deputies and city police went to the scene about 2 o'clock in the morning but were unable to spot anything. But the 2 young men telling their story this morning were dead serious and asserted they hadn't been drinking. Steve Mallette of 3305 Jackson Avenue and Roger Scarberry of 809 30th Street described the thing as being about 6 or 7 feet tall, having a wingspan of 10 feet, and red eyes about 2 inches in diameter and 6 inches apart. It was like a man with wings, Mallette said. It wasn't like anything you'd see on TV or in a monster movie. The men and their wives were in Scarberry's car between 11:30 p.m. and midnight when they spotted the creature near the old power plant adjacent to the old National Guard Armory buildings. The creature was seen standing on 3 occasions and was described as being extremely fast. Quote, "It flew about 100 miles an hour," end quote. In flight, but was a clumsy runner. Deputy Millard Halstead said he had seen dust in the vicinity of a coal field, but it could have been caused by the bird, he said. "I'm a hard guy to scare," Scarberry said, "but last night I was for getting out of there." They did just that, but the thing followed them. They said it was hovering over their car, apparently gliding until they reached the National Guard Armory on Route 62. "We went downtown, turned around and went back, and there it was again," Mallette said. "It seemed to be waiting on us." He said the light gray creature then scurried through a field. It had also flown across the top of the car. "It apparently is afraid of light," Mallette reasoned, "and maybe it thought it was scaring us off." The young men said they saw the creature's eyes, which glowed red, only when their lights shined on it, and it seemed to want to get away from the lights. They said it looked like a man with wings, but that his head was not an outstanding characteristic. Both were slightly pale and tired from lack of sleep during the night following their harrowing experience. They speculated that the thing was living in the vacant power plant, possibly in one of the huge boilers. "There are pigeons in all the other buildings," Mallette said, "but not in that one." "If I had seen it while by myself, I wouldn't have said anything," Scarberry commented, "but there were 4 of us who saw it. They said it didn't resemble a bat in any way, but maybe what you would visualize as an angel. The last time they saw it was at the gate of the C.C. Lewis farm on Route 62. They heard a sound like wings flapping, and they said the bird rose straight up like a helicopter. This doesn't have an explanation to it," Mallette said. "It was an animal, but nothing like I've seen before." "Are they going back to look for the creature?" "Yes," Mallette said, "this afternoon and again tonight." "Today," Scarberry said, "but tonight, I don't know." So, a couple interesting things from that newspaper article. They said the eyes were 2 inches in diameter. That's a pretty big eye. That's a really big eye. And that the head was not a prominent feature, so it's kind of headless, which throughout history, a lot of the reports do say that the Mothman sort of was headless. Conflicting with the red eyes, because some of the reports didn't have red eyes, but obviously the main Mothman accounts and encounters describe red eyes. Another interesting thing is that they were saying it was afraid of light. So that's something to explore further. And that it was kind of stalking them. I'm going to go over another article from November 18th, 1966. This was in the Ohio River Valley. "Monster no joke for those who saw it. They think it's a big joke. They think we can go out there and it'll come out for us. It is the red-eyed, winged-back, 6-foot man-like thing that has turned a remote section of Mason County, West Virginia into a dusty, carjacked thrill show. They are the hundreds of curious sightseers who have jammed a 10,000-acre east of Point Pleasant each night since the creature was sighted by 2 young married couples last Tuesday. The sightseers know there isn't such a thing, but they aren't about to miss a chance seeing it. The people who've seen it so far, especially Mr. and Mrs. Roger Scarberry and Mr. and Mrs. Steve Mallette, are afraid they'll see it again, but they keep looking. I hope others do see it. I hope it scares them as much as it did us. Maybe then they'll believe things exist and we're not dreaming, Mrs. Mallette said. The 2 couples first spotted the creature Tuesday in the sprawling marshy area which contained the McClintock Wildlife Sanctuary and a huge abandoned TNT plant. Most of the property is government-owned. Thursday night, the area was ablaze from the lights of cars and flashlights as the curious traveled up and down the maze of dirt roads. Police officials estimate more than 1,000 persons were searching the area prior to midnight. Every intersection was jammed with parked cars and small camps of laughing, jostling young adults. Huge abandoned power plant buildings rang with the shriek of youngsters scaring themselves more in the pitch-black plants than the people standing in the narrow roadways. Volunteer police officers and firemen creeping through the crowds have one major fear. They estimated that each car in the area had at least one gun. One officer heard an automatic rifle bark several times Thursday night behind one of the many buildings. Early sightings, besides that of the 2 couples, have several things in common. The description includes 2 red eyes about 6 inches apart, wings with 10-foot span, and always man-like with stocky legs. These sightings come from Cheshire, Rutland, several persons in an isolated home near the TNT plant, and one in Doddridge County, West Virginia, east of Parkersburg. The Scarberry and Mallette said they believe the thing didn't mean to harm us, even though Mrs. Scarberry had to be treated for shock, only to chase them away. At one time, the creature came within 100 feet of their car. In all, they spotted it 5 times the first night. They've seen it twice since. The first night, it chased their car at speeds up to 100, gliding above and behind the vehicle. It emitted a sound similar to a record played at a high speed or a squeak of a mouse. What is it? They don't know. So another interesting piece of information. So now we get kind of like the big picture of the circus that Point Pleasant is becoming because of these sightings. You have 1,000 people coming out to try to spot it as well. The other interesting thing is the noise it makes, which is kind of a high-pitched mouse-like squeak. Very interesting. So, do we believe the Scarberry-Mallette account? I think most people would agree that they saw something. Some people say sandhill crane. Probably kind of silly. So, one thing I didn't mention about the sandhill crane earlier, that they top out at about 35 miles an hour. So they really only fly 25 to 35 miles per hour. So nowhere near 100 miles an hour. So Roger Scarberry's souped up Chevy should definitely be able to outrun a sandhill crane by quite a bit. So, do we believe them? Quite a lot of trouble to go through for something you're gonna make up, especially with all the fallout afterwards. And they always stuck to their story. But real quick, as always with the MINDSHOCK podcast, we're gonna go deep into this and examine every part of it. Let's take a look at their police reports. So, the police reports were taken several days afterwards. Linda Scarberry's report. We were riding through the TNT area on a side road by the old powerhouse building around 12 on Tuesday night, November 15th, 1966, when we came over this small rise in the road. All at once, Steve yelled for us to look at that thing in the road. A quick aside, to the Kenneth Duncan sighting on November 12th when they were digging the grave, he did not say, "Hey guys, look at that, that's crazy." Anyway, back to the police report. I looked up and saw it go around the corner at the old powerhouse. It didn't run but wobbled like it couldn't keep its balance. Its wings were spread just a little. We sat there a few seconds, then Roger took off. I kept yelling for him to hurry. We didn't even stop for the curves. We got out on Route 62 and was coming down the road, and that thing was sitting on the second hill when you come into the first bad curve. As soon as our lights hit it, it was gone. It spread its wings a little and went straight up into the air. When we got the armory, it was flying over our car. We were going between 100 and 105 miles per hour down that straight stretch, and that thing was just gliding back and forth over the back end of the car. As we got there in front of the lights by the resort, it dived at our car and went away. I could hear the wings flapping as if to get more speed as it went up. We were all terrified and kept yelling for Roger to go faster. As we came into that straight stretch by C.C. Lewis's farm, the thing was over our car again. Then it disappeared as we came into the lights by C.C. Lewis's gates. We went on downtown and stopped at Dairyland and tried to decide what to do. We just sat there and looked at each other. I wanted to go to the police, but Steve and Roger kept saying they'd just laugh at us. We talked about it a while, and Roger and Steve wanted to go back up the road. Mary and I kept trying to talk them out of it, and finally when we got to C.C. Lewis's gate, they decided they didn't want to go back up, so we turned around. As we were turning, we saw a big dead dog laying along the road. When we were almost turned around, this thing jumped up and leaped over our car and went through the field on the other side of the road. We decided to go to the police then and went down and around Tiny's drive-in looking for them. Gary was outside the drive-in getting ready to take a couple boys home, so we told him about seeing this thing and asked him to call the police. After the police came, we went back up the road in our car with Gary and the police about a half a mile behind us. I saw it then in a pasture field with its wings out a little, walking towards the car. Then it went up in the air and came at the car. As Gary's car lights came over the rise in the road and the lights shined on it, it disappeared. We went up and down the road looking for it, but didn't see it anymore. We went back down to the drive-in and got in Gary's car and went back up. We finally found Millard Halstead and got with him and went to the powerhouse building. We sat there with our lights out for about 15 to 20 minutes when I heard that squeaking sound like a mouse, only a lot stronger. A shadow went across the building over the hill across from us. Mary and I saw the red eyes then and told Millard. He shined the lights right on them without being told where they were. We saw dust coming from the ground or somewhere as Millard moved the spotlight around. We finally left and came to the trailer. The Malletts were afraid to go to their apartment, so we decided to stay together, but we didn't go to bed. We just turned on all the lights and stayed up. Wednesday, we went up again to the building and found those off tracks around the building. Steve was around the boilers by himself, and suddenly he came running out white as a sheet, yelling for someone. He said he saw it in the boiler. That night it was seen at Thomas's, so we went up there and Mary and I stayed in the house while Steve and Roger and a few others went looking for it. On the way up, I saw it from the highway about the trees gliding back and forth. They searched the area around Thomas's house but didn't find anything. We started home around 12:30 and I saw it in one of the maintenance buildings. Mary and I started crying and Roger took off. I kept thinking about that thing following us again, but it didn't. We went to my mother's and I went all to pieces. Roger and my dad took me down to the hospital. I finally got back home and we all stayed together that night again, but didn't go to bed till 3 or 4 o'clock. We were still afraid to go to sleep. The next Thursday, we went back up with the reporters and we all heard a clanging noise from inside the building. Roger and Steve and the reporters went back in and found the boiler door open that Steve had shut when he left a few minutes before that. That night we went back up and Mary Heyer and I saw the eyes inside the fenced-off place beside the power plant. Quick aside, Mary Heyer is the famous reporter-journalist that covered the Mothman case and had a long and distinguished career, and we'll be getting into her later. On the way home, I saw its eyes back in some trees from the road as the car went past and looked back and could see its form. That is the last time I have seen it. To me, it just looks like a man with wings. It was a dirty gray color. It has a body-shaped form with wings on its back that come around it. It has muscular legs like a man and fiery red eyes that glow when the lights hit it. There was no glowing about it until the lights hit it. I couldn't see its head or arms. I don't know if the eyes are even in a head. When we came down the straight stretch by the armory, it didn't even seem like it had any trouble keeping up with us. It must have had very powerful wings. At no time did this thing fly at us from the front of the car. It stayed over the back end of the car while it was chasing us. It seemed to be afraid of lights, but I read in the paper today that it had been seen in the daytime in town. That I don't understand. The prints were found at C.C. Lewis's gate and at both powerhouses and at Thomas's. They looked like two horseshoes put together, but they're smooth. I know people are laughing at us, but it's no laughing matter. We'll never forget this thing. It has affected our lives in many ways. I am keeping going on nerve and sleeping pills. When it gets dark, I feel the fear creeping over me. When I go any place, I automatically look up and out the windows. I am afraid to sleep at night, so I lay awake sometimes crying with fear. When I do sleep or go to bed, the lights burn all night. Even in the daylight, I'm afraid to be by myself. I walk around in my own house expecting to see that thing. I close my eyes day or night and I can see those red, fiery eyes staring at me. Every little noise scares me to death. I can stand in a crowd and hear people talking about us and laughing. People have said we were probably liquored up, but we were not. They go up there expecting to see it, but then they say they don't believe us. We have seen it, so we know what to look for, and we are constantly looking. Not because we want to see it, but because we're afraid we'll see it again. Out of all the phone calls we've gotten, not one minister has called to help us or try to explain what it is. We all agree we'd like to talk to a minister about it, but now no one takes us that serious. One minister even laughed and said they'd finally run the devil out of their church, and that's what we saw. We've been harassed and laughed at and called crazy. We just can't go up there and hand it to people on a silver platter like they seem to want us to do. We are never really going to get over our fear until we find out for sure what this thing is. I know I'll never forget it. I don't think anyone can who has seen it. So next is Mary Mallette's report. The four of us were riding around between 11:30 and 12 o'clock Tuesday, November 15th, 1966, when we came in from behind the old powerhouse, and as soon as we came up in seeing distance of the powerhouse, Steve first seen this thing along the side of the road and it ran to the powerhouse. That is when I first saw this thing, which appeared to be a man about 6 feet tall with wings on its back and red eyes 2 inches in diameter and about 6 inches apart. The Scarberrys also saw this thing at the corner of the powerhouse, and we all seemed to be stunned, and he took off out the road at a fast speed, and as we drove back toward town on Route 62, we saw this man with wings standing on a bank, but I could not see his head, and as soon as our lights hit the bank, you could see its eyes plainly, and it seemed to take off upward very fast. Well, we all saw that, and Roger, the driver, speeded down the road, and as we speeded down the road on the straight stretch at a speed of 100 or 105 miles per hour, the thing glided over top of our car back and forth until we drove into the lights by the armory. The thing never once flew in front of our car. It seemed to be afraid of the lights. We drove down through town and stopped in the lights at about Dairyland to talk, and we all discussed it, and Linda said, "I think we should go to the police," but we didn't. Then we decided to go back. We got as far as C.C. Lewis's gate because we were not really for going back. As Roger turned the car around, the lights moved over a large dead dog along the side of the road. As we turned, something ran from behind a tree and jumped over top the back of our car and ran out through the field. Then was when we decided we should tell someone. We went down by Tiny's drive-in, and Gary and a couple others were just coming out the door, so we told him what we had seen. We were all frightened, and the first thing he asked us, "Have you kids been drinking?" And our answer was no, we had not been drinking. So we asked Gary to call the police, and he did. We waited on the police, and when they arrived, we decided that the four of us would go up the road ahead of everyone. So we did. As we were driving up the road, we saw it again in a field, and it came up behind us, and when Gary's lights could be seen behind us, the thing left again, and we turned at the traffic circle and went back. Millard Halstead searched the treetops with his searchlights, and we all went back to Tiny's, and the four of us got into the car with Gary and went back in the dark area on the left side of the road. I had seen two large red eyes, and all I could do was point and burst into tears as fright came into me. But none of the other four saw anything there, so we turned at the traffic circle again and went back into town, and Gary told Millard of our frightening experience, and we got into the car with Millard and went back to the powerhouse and sat there with our doors locked and our lights off. We could all see shadows coming over the building, and I said, "I can see those eyes," and Millard put the spotlight right on them without asking any direction in which we were looking. Millard turned the lights on, and we all seen something looking like dust or smoke. We seen that twice, then we came back and got Roger's car, and we all went to the trailer. We decided to stay with them that night. We were all so frightened, we locked the doors and turned on all the lights and stayed up all night. We went back to the old powerhouse the next day, and they went with us. The men took their guns and went through the old powerhouse. Roger was on top of the building, and Steve was inside looking around, and Roger came down to the outside when we heard Steve yell, "Come back here." Roger came down before anyone else went into the place, and he said he opened one of the boiler doors and saw something move upward. Then we came and looked through the old building. We were all looking around the place and found some funny prints, like a double hoof print of a horse. Then we all returned home. We stayed together most of the time. At about 9:30 that evening, we heard that it was seen at Thomas's, so we went directly up there, and the men took their guns that night. We saw tracks up there, and we went home about 12:30, and we all stayed together that night. The next day was Thursday, and we went back with the TV reporters, and all the men looked in the building and came back to talk with us when they heard a clang in the building and went back to investigate the noise, and one of the doors of the boilers had been opened. That evening, we all went back. The reporters from the Messenger went up. While they were all looking at the building, Linda saw the eyes in a field, and Mrs. Heyer also saw the eyes. On the way home, right before we got to the Point Pleasant Resort, I saw it better than I had ever saw it before. I could see the complete outline of it and the eyes, but I could not see any head. That time was the most frightening time I had ever saw this. When you see something like this, you know you will never forget it. At night, you wonder where this man-like creature is and if it will harm you, and it is all I seem to think about. And when we go somewhere, I can feel someone laughing at me, and I can be in a crowd and hear people say, "Well, they were all liquored up," and God only knows we were not. But all I have heard and seen is news reporters and telephones. I do think I would feel better if a minister would come to talk to us and try to help us get over this fear. There has not been a minister to call us out of all our phone calls or even try to get in touch with us. I think a lot of time in these cases, people don't really look at the human side of it, but if you're these two teenage girls, you can only imagine how they felt, especially at that time in the 60s. You know, they didn't have all these scary, insane horror movies to kind of desensitize everyone a bit. Not that that would help if you're face to face with a monster, but just the overall societal outlook on it just must have been so insane for them. I couldn't find Steve Mallett's report, but Roger Scarberry's report is as follows. Tuesday night, about 12 o'clock, while riding in the TNT area, we came upon this thing. It was in the shape of a man with wings. This thing stood about 6 feet tall with wings on its back. It was light gray in color with red eyes, about 2 inches in diameter, 6 to 8 inches apart. When we came up over a rise in the road in front of the powerhouse, Steve saw these large red eyes. He pointed the eyes out to me, and when we all looked, it was going around the corner of the building. This thing runs awkward with its wings out to its side. After we stopped and looked at each other, I took off out the road toward the highway. When we came to the traffic circle and turned south on 62, we saw it again. It was on the bank on the left side of the road. This is where you could see it the best. But when the car lights shone on it, it moved its wings out to its side and went straight up in the air. We didn't see it again till we were on the straight road in front of the experiment farm, where it came over the car again. I speeded up to 100 miles an hour and it glided over the car till we came to the curve at the armory. Then it was gone. We came on into town. The thing must have been afraid of lights because it wouldn't come into town. We went downtown and stopped. We wanted to tell the police, but we were going to go back up to see for sure that it was still up the road. But when we were going up through town, we decided we didn't want to go back up. So I turned around at the gate at the C.C. Lewis farm. When I turned around, a dead dog was lying along the road. As I turned and started back down the road, this thing came out from behind where the dog was and went over the back of the car and out through the field on the other side of the road. Then we went down to Tiny's drive-in and told Gary what we saw and told him to call the police. When the police got there, Gary and the police followed us back up the road where we saw it again. The dog was gone. But when his car came over the hill behind us, it was gone. From there, we went back to this field, but didn't see it again. So we went down to town. Then we went with the deputy sheriff back to the power plant and stopped. We sat in the car and saw dust or smoke coming up from the coal yard behind the plant. From there, we went back and got in the car and went home. The next day, Wednesday. The next day, we went back to the power plant and looked around where Steve saw it again in a boiler inside the plant. Then Wednesday night, it was seen at Thomas's home in the TNT area. We went up to Thomas's home the same night and found a footprint this thing had made. Thursday, we went up to the plant with reporters and went through it. While we were inside, Steve shuts the boiler door. When we were outside, we hear a loud noise. We went back inside and the door was open. What this thing looked like. It is about 6 feet tall with large wings on its back. It has the shape of a man. It has 2 red eyes about 2 inches in diameter, 6 to 8 inches apart. A wingspread of 10 feet. The thing, whatever it is, definitely not a crane or goose or balloon or any of the things it has been called. I have seen it and know what it looks like. So there we have it, the official police reports. Interesting to note that Mary Mallette actually saw it an additional time when Linda did not, and Linda seems to have seen it the most times. So staying with chronological order, let's look at the dog account. Keep in mind, so these police reports were written 3 days after the original encounter, so they do not include any information of what happened after those 3 days, which I will also get into. So, the dog is speculated to belong to Merle Partridge. And Merle Partridge's sighting supposedly took place in Salem, West Virginia, which is about 100 miles north of Point Pleasant. So it may or may not have been the dead dog carcass. Now, the other problem with this report is supposedly the date could have been as early as November 13th. It could have been either the 13th, the 14th, or the 15th, the same night as the Scarberry-Mallette sighting. But it was reported after the Scarberry-Mallette sighting was published, the following day, the 16th. So Merle Partridge was a contractor. He was watching TV when he noticed the glowing red lights or eyes in his field. It was 10:30 at night. The TV went out. If you remember having a non-digital TV, when the signal goes out, it's that herringbone pattern, the static pattern. So that showed up on the TV, and there was a loud, high-pitched whining noise. He said it sounded like a generator winding up. So his dog was on the end of the porch, and it started howling towards the barn. So Partridge said the dog's behavior was very strange. So Partridge grabbed a shotgun and went out on the porch. He saw the 2 red lights moving in a circular pattern. So his dog, called Bandit, ran towards the field, and he never saw the dog again. The following day, Merle was out looking for the dog by the barn, and he saw paw prints. He said, "Here and there I could see Bandit's paw prints. These were rather easy to find, for he was a heavy dog and the area was muddy. He also found the dog tracks where he thinks he saw the red lights. The dog tracks were going around in a circle, and they didn't veer anywhere else, and there were no tracks of any other kind. So he searched for weeks and weeks and never found the dog. A strange point, a few weeks after this night, Partridge told friends and family that he wouldn't be surprised if he would find the body of Bandit nearby. So Partridge reported his sighting to the sheriff, George Johnson, and said that when he aimed his flashlight in the field, the eyes would light up like bicycle reflectors. And he also thinks that the strange TV behavior and the high-pitched whine were related to the Mothman. He also stated that he believed that the dog the Scarberry-Mallette saw on the road was his, because Bandit was very well trained, and if he were alive, he would have returned to him. So, John Keel lists this sighting as November 14th, so this would be the night before. In the Eyes of the Mothman documentary listed as November 13th, and in the 2002 book Mothman and Other Curious Encounters by Lauren Coleman lists the sighting as the 15th. Now, if this sighting happened technically at 10:30 at night, and if you're saying that the Mothman sighting happened midnight, that could conflict one date, but either way, that's the dog sighting. So the other sighting intertwined at this beginning, the sighting they mentioned at Thomas's house near the TNT plant, this is Marcella Bennett's Mothman sighting. And this occurred on Wednesday, November 16th, the night after the original Scarberry-Mallette sighting. She describes the whole ordeal as, "I knew it was nothing from this earth. I knew the creature, whatever it was, didn't live here." Very interesting. So Marcella Bennett, her brother Raymond Wamsley, and his wife Kathy were bringing Marcella's 2-year-old daughter Tina to visit relatives, and they lived near the TNT area in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. So this was in the newspaper the following day. In that day's newspaper was the Mallette Scarberry sighting reported. So they had actually read about it in the newspaper, and they thought that it would be interesting to go see if they could see it. So the house they were visiting was a bungalow near the domes that housed the munitions in the TNT area. And this was Ralph Thomas's house. He was the superintendent of the Trojan U.S. operations there. His wife, Virginia Thomas, is Marcella Bennett's sister, so she's visiting her brother-in-law's house. So she arrives there with her brother and his wife, and they find that Ralph and Virginia left to go to church. So their kids, Ricky, Connie, and Vicky, were the only ones there. So this was at about 9 o'clock. So they leave and go back to their car. And that's when they see lights in the sky hovering above. Raymond stopped when he got to the bottom of the steps. He told Marcella, but she said she didn't want to see any lights in the sky. And he says, "No, stop, you've got to look at this. This isn't a plane." Again, throwback to the Duncan sighting. If he didn't even try to inform his compatriots, "Hey, look, there's lights in the sky." Like, if you're there, even if it's a weird plane, you would still mention it. So, but anyway, back to this. She's carrying their daughter, and she doesn't want to look. Then a figure moved behind the car, and she sees it. She sees the Mothman as she's unlocking the car door. She sees the legs and says they were covered with gray feathers, and she didn't see any feet. So then she looked up and she saw that the wings were drawn in towards the body and the head was tilted sideways. It looked like a bird, but was way bigger than a bird. It was only a few feet away from her, a giant man bird with its head sunken into its shoulders. She said she saw no red eyes. Later on, she said she might have been too scared to see the red eyes, but she described the creature over 6 feet tall with feathers. It looked like a giant bird, but yet a man, and it was standing with its shoulders arched and its neck down. She was too scared to run. I just stood there and looked at it, but I couldn't figure out what it was that I was seeing. Her brother saw it, but would not move forward. They were both frozen in fright. He yelled for her to run, but she couldn't. A moment later, she managed to turn around, and she took 4 steps towards the house before falling down on top of her daughter. She couldn't get up, as if she was paralyzed. I just couldn't do what my mind was wanting me to do, she explained. She heard the flapping of wings as she was trying to run. At that point, she was able to pick up her daughter and go towards the house. The kids were waiting on the steps, and Raymond heard the creature flap its wings again as Marcella reached them. They immediately locked themselves into the house. Marcella's hands and knees were skinned up, scraped and bruised and bleeding from when she fell down. She had also been burned from falling on top of her lit cigarette. The side of her face was also bleeding. The kids were all going crazy, screaming and crying. Raymond called the police. So, the Mothman apparently at this time went onto the porch, pushing the door and looking into the windows. Wow, how creepy is that? It took the police 15 to 20 minutes to get to the house, and then the Mothman was gone. So the police saw that Marcella was injured from the fall, so they believed that lent credence to what they were reporting. And they searched all around the house, guns drawn. So at this point, not only were the police there, but a bunch of onlookers and cars from other places started showing up. It looked like a drive-in theater. Marcella said it was the most frightening experience of her life, and she did not feel comfortable talking about it. She was traumatized and couldn't sleep. I would think I could hear the wings flapping and noise on top of the roof. I kept feeling that this thing had followed us home, she said. She said she felt that the creature had a link to her, and she never drove at night again. I couldn't sleep, and I was hearing things and thought that it was right outside and still after me. I couldn't imagine what this thing was or where it came from and what was its purpose. It was close enough to harm me, but it didn't. She went to Holzer Hospital after the ordeal because of her fear and insomnia. I didn't want to tell the doctor what I had seen, but he asked me if I was Marcella Bennett. He asked me if I was one of the people who saw the big bird in Point Pleasant. She said she could feel the Mothman's presence at all times. When she was driving, she could feel it was in the back seat, but when she turned around, it wouldn't be there. She did give several interviews throughout the time, so that's her encounter. Very, very interesting because she does not mention the red eyes. There's an article published Friday, November 18th, 1966, titled Mason County Has Flying Mystery. It's from Morgantown Dominion. The mystery of the flying whatever it was continued here Thursday. 4 more people reported sighting a huge bird-like creature with red eyes, and in Doddridge County, more than 100 miles to the north, a farmer feels his German Shepherd was dog-napped by the beast. Mason County Sheriff George Johnson said he does not discount the stories of Steve Mallette and Roger Scarberry and their wives. All 4 swear they saw the creature 3 times late Tuesday and early Wednesday near an abandoned power plant 5 miles north of here. Raymond Wamsley and his wife, Marcella Bennett, and Ricky Thomas had told Johnson they saw it too in the same general area. Johnson says he feels whatever everyone saw was nothing more than a freak shitepoke, a large bird of the heron family. The shitepoke, or shag as it is sometimes known, is the smallest heron in the Western Hemisphere. No one, however, could explain how a shag or similar large bird could fly 100 miles per hour, as Scarberry and Mallette said the one they saw did. All 4 said they would take lie detector tests. At a farm in Doddridge County near the Harrison County community of Salem, contractor Newell Partridge said he saw something with eyes like red reflectors in a meadow near his home. He cited this thing about 90 minutes before the Point Pleasant incident. Partridge said his television set began acting up, sounding like a generator, and his $350 German Shepherd Bandit started carrying on something terrible. After the dog had howled for some time, Partridge said he opened the door and shined a flashlight into the field where the reflectors were seen. The dog's hair stood straight up, Partridge said, and the animal then went after the reflectors. The dog never returned, and no trace of it was found. Partridge and his wife said the dog had never stayed away from home for more than 15 minutes in the last 3 years. So these are the main cases surrounding the original sighting. One more aspect, which only the most diehard of Mothman fans probably know about. One thing Linda Scarberry is also quoted as saying, "I wish we had never seen it. I wish someone else had seen it." We covered everything in the police reports from the several days surrounding it, but there's a little bit more to the story. Apparently, this was not the end. These few days of terror were not the end for the Scarberries and Mallettes. Particularly the Scarberries, because it looks like Linda was the most affected. So they were living on their own. The Scarberries were living on their own near Tiny's diner. And they began experiencing strange poltergeist-type activity in their home. So this was the high-pitched phonograph record speeding sound, kind of like the whining mouse noise combination with a sped-up phonograph record. But what's even stranger is that they moved in with Linda's parents afterwards, and the strange activity continued at Linda's parents' home. And Linda's mother, Mabel Daniel, actually had her own sighting of the Mothman, and this was on January 11th, a few months after 1967. She had seen the large creature over Route 62 near Tiny's Drive-In restaurant at 5 p.m. She was walking near the diner when she saw the object. "I thought it was an airplane, then I realized it was flying much too low. It was brown and had a wingspan of at least 10 feet. I thought I could see 2 legs like a man's dangling down from it. It circled over Tiny's and then flew off. The thing didn't seem to have a head or neck, and the wings were motionless, and it was completely silent as it glided through the air." This was reported in John Keel's book, The Mothman Prophecies, 1975. But back to the poltergeist activity, it followed them from their home to Linda's parents' home. John Keel wrote in the Mothman Prophecies, Roger and Linda Scarberry were living in a house trailer at the time of their Mothman sighting. In the week that followed, they were suddenly plagued by strange sounds around the trailer at night. Beeps and loud garbled noises like a speeded up phonograph record. They could not locate the source of the sounds outside or inside the trailer. The couple later settled in the basement apartment in the home of Linda's parents. The McDaniels. The McDaniel family has been living in the Twilight Zone ever since their daughter and others had first glimpsed Mothman. Odd lights appeared in the house, objects moved by themselves, and the heavy odor of cigar smoke was frequently noted, but no one in the family smoked. In December, they even sighted the Mothman on their roof. December 1966, and this was when they were living on 13th Street in Point Pleasant. Linda said, "We saw it again about a month after we first saw it when we lived on 13th Street. The roof slanted down at an angle from the upstairs bedroom window. I looked out that window. It was sitting down. Its wings were folded around itself like it was trying to keep warm. It had its head turned sideways, looking in through the window as if it was curious. By then, I had figured out that it didn't want to hurt me. I could just tell by the way it looked at me. I was very curious and wanted to try to communicate with it, but I still didn't know what it was or where it came from, and was a little scared of it still. It looked so lonely, but not scared anymore. It looked cold, too. It was really cold out that night. And supposedly this was not the end of the roof activity. The Mothman, Mary Heyer wrote, the journalist reporter, she wrote letters to John Keel, and she actually wrote about Roger and Linda experiencing Mothman roof activity. Linda's mother, Mabel, says that it was on the roof 3 nights, June 29th, June 30th, and July 1st, 1967. Mabel said that Roger and Linda swear that the monster has been on their roof the past 3 nights. Linda even claims that she sees its red eyes and has been a nervous wreck, according to Mabel. I really don't know what to think of this deal, if they really see something or just think they do. When Linda was interviewed again about Mothman, she was asked whether it was good or bad. She said, "I don't think it ever had evil intentions. It had numerous chances to harm or even kill me and some other people, but it didn't. I think its main intention was to not get hurt itself. A lot of people tried to kill it or capture it. I don't think it would have hurt anybody or anything. A lot of dogs started turning up missing. A lot of people blamed that on the Mothman, but I don't think it was him." Interesting. Back to their poltergeist activity, there was another incident when Linda, her aunt, and the 5-year-old infant daughter Danny were all sleeping in her bedroom. Linda woke up and saw the shadowy form of a man in the room. They had left the kitchen light on so that there was a little bit of light, and Linda said she saw that the man wore a black and white checkered shirt with black pants, coal black crew-cut hair, and dark unblinking eyes. He just stood there staring at her, and she couldn't move. She was paralyzed. He then took a cigarette out and lit it, and there was a gold crucifix that Linda had hung above Danny's bed. When the man lit the cigarette, the crucifix reflected the light and caught his eye. He turned to look at it, and so did Linda. When she turned back, he was gone. Linda claimed that her aunt woke up and said she had dreamed the exact same events that happened in the room. They searched the house, all the doors were still locked, and there was no sign of an intruder. So very creepy stuff. So what's also really interesting is as time went on, Linda Scarberry felt that the Mothman was not evil and was not intending to do her harm. She even mentioned that it looked lonely and cold sitting on her roof. Now, some would argue that these could all just be psychological implantations from the Mothman to manipulate the witnesses in some way. If indeed it is a malevolent being, it might try to hide that, and these could be psychological aspects of how the Mothman implants and manipulates. The going over the Marcella Bennett account as part of this whole thing, the fact that she did not see glowing red eyes is pretty interesting, because all of the as verifiable as you can get, all of the suspected Mothman sightings, that's one of the key features of the Mothman, identifying the Mothman, is the glowing, piercing red eyes. Why wouldn't it have the red eyes? Was it really the Mothman? Was her sighting made up? Was it a psychological, again, could it have been some sort of psychological wave of attack where she didn't really see the Mothman, she thought she did, and for whatever reason, the glowing red eyes were not part of that psychological attack? It would be interesting to note whether Raymond Wamsley, her brother, whether or not he saw the glowing red eyes. Although, if they were simply making it up because of the previous sighting, that would be unusual, because then in terms of a copycat sighting, they would mention the red eyes. So, just an interesting abnormality among many in the Mothman case. But this has been the main account, and those surrounding it. In the next episode, we'll get into even more accounts following these main accounts. And we'll get into some of the more mysterious, even more mysterious aspects of the case. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast. If you'd like, you can donate to our PayPal in the link in the description, and it'll help us bring you even more MindShock episodes. Have a good night. This is Bruce McGuire signing off.